Good morning, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. Israel has denied attacking civilians evacuating northern Gaza after 70 people were reportedly killed on Friday. Israel's Prime Minister tells his soldiers to get ready as the IDF says it will attack Gaza by land, air and sea. And British nationals in Gaza are told to head to the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, but there's confusion over who will be allowed through and when. Well, in a moment, we'll be discussing the Sunday papers with communications expert Zaki Cooper and broadcaster Afia Hagen. But first, let's take you through today's front pages. Escape to Hell, that headline from the Daily Mirror as it details the situation in Gaza. The Observer looks at Israel's warning to those fleeing Gaza as they say the next stage is coming. The Sunday Telegraph is also leading with Israel's ground operation in Gaza, as is the Sunday Times. The Sunday Express headlines the Prime Minister's words, "We stand by Israel always," and reports on the former Labour leader joining thousands in supporting Palestinians in yesterday's march. The Mail on Sunday focuses on yesterday's London march, picturing two women parading with pictures of paragliders used by Hamas. Well, with us this morning to review the papers is communications expert Zaki Cooper and broadcaster Afia Hagen. Good to see you both again. Only one story dominating the papers, understandably, the very concerning and heartbreaking situation in the Middle East. Zaki, let's kick off with you. The front page, we're looking inside the Telegraph on this one, aren't we? Rishi Sunak urging to sanction Qatar for hosting Hamas. They have leadership there, a bit like the Taliban do. Qatar very much seeing themselves as an intermediary in this region when it comes to all these factions who have offices there in Qatar.
Yeah, I mean, Qatar has had long and deep associations with Hamas, and there obviously a number of Hamas leaders are in Qatar, notably Ismail Haniyeh, one of the main leaders of the terrorist group. And there's an interesting story in the Sunday Telegraph where some groups are urging the British government to sanction Qatar. But actually, Qatar is obviously a really important regional player in this. I mean, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in the country a few days ago talking to their leadership. And I think there'll obviously be a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes as well as some in front of camera. But the more we can use some of these players to exert pressure on Hamas, the better. So I think sanctions are certainly an option we should keep open and a last resort, but we should be looking to leverage the UK's significant influence in the Gulf. Obviously, Qatar and other Gulf countries have extensive economic and other links to the UK, and the UK has a lot of leverage in those countries. So I think there is the potential to use that, but obviously to keep sanctions as a resort if needs be.
Yeah, certainly. Military operations do not seem to be working after decades of conflict. Dialogue is essential. Afia, you've got a story inside The Sun. I actually don't have a copy of it in front of me, but the headline is "Mob Plot Hammer Blitz on UK Firms." What's that all about?
Well, the BBC yesterday was sprayed with red paint, and that was done by Palestinian Action. They took responsibility for that attack and said that they are planning lots of other ways of attacking British defence systems, other notable buildings. The Sun say they managed to penetrate a secret Zoom meeting which took place on Wednesday, just days after the attack on the weekend. And it's basically about rallying against what they say are Zionists, and basically they are planning to attack different government buildings and defence systems different ways. So you've got the paint that was sprayed on the BBC yesterday. It's about attacking their systems, that they're going to chain themselves to places or glue themselves to buildings. And this is against who they say are Zionists. But it seems to me that this is people seizing on what's happening in the Middle East and using it as an excuse for violence, basically. And I think earlier on we were talking about, the rise in anti-Semitism, and people are jumping on what's happening in the Middle East, jumping on a terribly heartbreaking and difficult situation on both sides and using it to either be anti-Palestinian or anti-Semitic. And that is just atrocious.
Zaki, let's get your thoughts on that before we move on. You're a member of the Jewish community here in the UK.
Yeah.
What's your take on actions like that seen outside the BBC yesterday, but also the really concerning and depressing rise in anti-Semitism?
Yeah, well, the right to protest is a fundamental part of our democracy, but if it's done unlawfully, then the law should be brought to bear. And clearly, if people are inciting hatred or doing other things that go against the law, then the police must take action. From the Jewish community's point of view, we've seen an incredibly alarming rise in anti-Semitic incidents over the last few days, as much as an increase of by 500% on the normal levels. So, and I've heard anecdotally of various incidents, both online and in actuality, as in verbal and physical attacks on Jews that have taken place. So it's an incredibly worrying situation. The community is very much on edge, and we need the police and all right-minded people to come to our defence.
Let's move on to a double-page spread inside today's Sunday Mirror. I'd love both your thoughts on this. As you said before, Afia, we're seeing horrific human suffering on both sides, and what is going on in Gaza is absolutely devastating when you look at the civilian suffering there. Certainly a huge focus on this today in many of the papers, especially the Sunday Mirror. Afia.
Yeah, absolutely. This headline saying rockets are 400 meters away. It's terrifying and the ground shaking. And that picture there with a man with two children with a baby in his arms, actually, as he is fleeing the destruction behind him. And they've actually got a few different stories, people on video calls seeing things, the effect that this is going to have on children, that are just seeing death around every single corner at every turn, crying for their parents, crying for their grandparents, people who've been taken. And I know I keep saying it, but at the centre of this, you have families, generations who are being destroyed on both sides, families being ripped apart, children seeing unmistakable violence, adults seeing unmistakable violence, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better, because we are on the verge of this attack that's coming by land, sea and air. I can't bear to think what pictures we'll be seeing after that. And when we think of what we've seen over this week and what we've heard, verified and unverified, it's really, really scary.
Zaki, your take on this huge evacuation order that we've seen in place in northern Gaza, so much death in Gaza already, and of course the ground invasion hasn't even started yet. And I'd love your take on this.
Yeah.
Perhaps one of the voices that is getting lost in all of this on both sides is that there are so many people who just want the same thing. Palestinians and Israelis who just want peace, and they don't want to see any of this.
Yeah. Well, as Afua said, it's this double-page spread in the Sunday Mirror really highlights the human pain caused by the conflict. And you'd have to have a heart of stone to look at any of the images or read any of the stories not to be moved and affected by them. We all have families, some of us are parents, and these are very distressing images, not to mention, of course, the terrible images that have been released by Hamas of live executions of people and the images that the Israeli army released last week of butchered babies. I mean, horrific, distressing images. But absolutely, there's suffering going on both sides. I think it is important to make a distinction that Hamas revel in death. Their aim is to kill as many Israelis and Jews as possible. The Israel Defense Force has a code of ethics, and the death of any innocent civilian is absolutely not their aim and regrettable. And it's very important to keep clear about that moral distinction when we look at these images.
Yeah, you make a very good point. Afia, let's talk about the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. The BBC have faced a lot of scrutiny this week over terminology when it comes to how they describe Hamas as terrorists or not terrorists. And then this story about BBC Arabic reporters allegedly justifying the killing of civilians by Hamas on social media.
So the BBC being further embroiled in an impartiality row. This is after some of its journalists were seen endorsing comments that likened Hamas, to freedom fighters, as well as describing what happened last Saturday as a morning of hope. You had one senior correspondent who appeared to make fun of Israeli relatives of a grandmother who was abducted by Hamas. Another one tweeted that Israel's prestige is crying in the corner. Now, the BBC said it is investigating this. It said it's urgently investigating this. And you have Dame Caroline Dinenage, the chairman of the Commons Culture, Media and Sport Committee, said that language matters and it's vital that media coverage of the heartbreaking events in Israel and Gaza are covered with the utmost sensitivity and impartiality by all journalists. And that's absolutely true. And what you can't have actually at the BBC or any organisation is any side endorsing, or any journalist endorsing one side or the other. That absolutely cannot happen. And especially endorsing tweets or comments or anything that seems to mock an atrocity or mock families of those who have relatives have been killed. That's absolutely not on. It's disgusting, and actually they shouldn't be employed anymore.
Yeah, rather unthinkable to put that out there. Afia, Zaki, thank you both so much. Great to have you with us this morning. Thanks for coming in.